So we've got some major new developments in a Supreme Court case that could reshape when the federal government can be held accountable for botched law enforcement raids. This all comes out of the case where the FBI smashed into the wrong home, terrorized an innocent family, and now the government is still trying to avoid responsibility even after losing unanimously at the Supreme Court level. And now the family has filed their response brief accusing the Trump DOJ of trying to dodge what the Supreme Court just said and made very crystal clear in their recent ruling. So let's break down what is happening in this critical case. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe, and then also make sure you turn on all notifications, because that helps to ensure that you will get these videos once I release them. Also, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is TacPack. TacPack is a subscription-based box that delivers tactical and EDC gear to your front door every single month. And right now, TacPack is doing something special. The next TacPack Plus box features essential gear for your next build, range gear, and a limited edition run of a previous TacPack favorite that everybody's been asking for. The February TacPack Plus box is going to be worth $225, and if you sign up using my code ARMED, you get a free additional $60 tactical gift, by buying that first box, and that brings your value up for that first subscription to $285 in value of the Plus box, plus the additional free gift. So if you're interested in TacPack, this is the month to sign up. Make sure you use my code ARMED to get that additional box, to get that additional gift. And again, you can find all of that linked down below to TacPack, both in the detail section and the comment section. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you will know that the Supreme Court recently issued a 9-0 unanimous decision in favor of a family called the Martins. Essentially back in 2017, FBI agents executed a pre-dawn raid against a family in the suburban Atlanta area. Now, the only problem is that they hit the wrong house. Agents were supposed to go to a specific address, but instead relied on a personal GPS, I believe a phone, and ended up in a completely different home where Katrina Martin lived with her boyfriend and her young child. The FBI was supposed to actually be 3 doors down, trying to raid a house where some gang members were believed to be, but instead they raided this family's home. The FBI smashed in the front door, detonated flashbang grenades, pointed guns at the family, detained them, pulled Katrina Martin out essentially half naked, and essentially only later did the FBI realize that they actually raided the wrong house. In response to this, the family sued the FBI under the Federal Tort Claims Act, also known as the FTCA, and that's the law that allows citizens to sue the federal government when its employees commit wrongful acts. But the government here, the FBI, claimed that there was immunity using something called the discretionary function exception to the FTCA. And they argued that how the raid was planned essentially involved discretion and also policy judgments. Both the District Court and the 11th Circuit on review originally agreed with the FBI and ruled in their favor. This case eventually went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and the court ruled 9-0 in favor of the family. So this opinion was authored by Justice Gorsuch, who wrote that the 11th Circuit applied the discretionary function exception far too broadly in order that the court there needed to take a fresh look at whether the FBI's actions were actually protected under the law. In short, the Supreme Court said that you don't automatically get immunity just because law enforcement exercised judgment. You must show that those decisions and that judgment was grounded in legitimate policy choices, not just any type of decision or any just simply type of discretion. But now there are some new developments in this case now that it's back in the hands of the 11th Circuit. After the Supreme Court sent the case back down, the DOJ filed a new brief in the 11th Circuit arguing that the case should still be dismissed and that essentially this case should be thrown out even despite what the Supreme Court just said. The government here claims that the agents' mistakes flowed from discretionary decisions about surveillance, navigation, and also their approach tactics about how they identified this home and how they went in. The FBI argues that no statute or rule specifically dictates how agents have to identify a home, and therefore they claim the discretionary function exception blocks this lawsuit going forward. So essentially, in other words, the DOJ is trying to preserve immunity by repackaging some of the same arguments that they already made and which were already rejected by the Supreme Court. But now this family has fired back against the DOJ and the FBI with a very powerful response brief. They argue that the federal government cannot hide behind the discretionary function exception for basic operational failures. Their core arguments are very simple. They claim that executing a warrant at the correct address is not a policy decision. It's simply something that is a ministerial duty, something where there is no discretion at all. Essentially, federal agents do not have the discretion to raid the wrong home or to get the wrong address and essentially just not read the warrant. They say that the discretionary function exception was meant to protect actual policy judgments, not reckless mistakes like ignoring the address on a warrant or trusting a personal GPS device instead. The brief argues that raiding the wrong home, traumatizing an innocent family, and pointing guns at the family is not grounded in any legitimate federal policy. And so essentially they also argue that once this shield of the FTCA is removed, essentially all the other basic laws and basic rules apply to what the FBI did. And that is, if a private person would be liable under state law for this type of conduct, then the United States is liable as well. And under the ordinary tort laws, especially there in the state of Georgia, kicking in the wrong door would clearly trigger liability. The Martins also claim that the DOJ's current position would create very dangerous consequences for everyone in the nation. If accepted, it would mean that any law enforcement raid could be insulated from lawsuits simply by labeling a mistake as something like a discretion. Wrong house raids would be immune from accountability, and victims would have no legal remedy for even the most reckless conduct that's maybe performed by law enforcement officers. That would expand government immunity far beyond what Congress intended, especially when they passed the FTCA, and would go far beyond what the Supreme Court has just allowed in recent unanimous rulings. So where does this leave us in this critical challenge? Well, now you have a unanimous Supreme Court ruling narrowing the type of government immunity that is granted maybe in these types of situations. The DOJ is still trying to avoid accountability by repackaging some of the same arguments that have already been rejected and trying to present those to the 11th Circuit to get them to rule the exact same way. And the 11th Circuit is now forced to decide whether wrong house raids are protected policy decisions or unlawful and essentially just negligence. This case is no longer just about this single family. It's about whether federal agents can be held responsible when they invade the wrong home, or whether the government can always escape this type of liability by claiming mistakes are simply discretion. The Supreme Court made very clear that the lower court must draw a real line here and take a fresh, clean look at this case based on what they just said in that 9-0 ruling. And now the 11th Circuit has set oral arguments to take place in this case, in this critical issue during the week of March 23rd. So that's where things currently stand right now in this critical Supreme Court accountability case. The DOJ continues to fight to preserve immunity. The Martins continue to push back against that, and they're pointing directly to what the Supreme Court just said. And the 11th Circuit must now apply the Supreme Court ruling and decide whether this case goes to trial and if it should move forward. But like I mentioned, the Trump DOJ is currently doubling down and trying to repackage the same arguments that were already rejected by the Supreme Court. So as soon as we get more answers and as this develops more, I will bring that straight to you guys. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to hit, like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notifications. All of that stuff helps the algorithm and tells the algorithm that you appreciate this type of video. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.